Hey, you're on a... Huh?
4. Okay, take 2. My name is Robert. This is my final speech for this year, for the speech class. And it is my persuasive speech about voting. In the mid to late 1800s, the U.S. had 80% of its eligible voters turn out on election days, which was an all-time high. Today, that number has dropped to between 50 and 60% for national elections, and even lower for state elections. Some might say that modern voters are apathetic and too wrapped up in their own lives to bother voting. I would argue that our tradition of making elections on a Tuesday in November, along with voter suppression, are the main reasons for this drop in voter turnout. Every American deserves a method of voting that doesn't overburden them financially. So first, I will explain why we vote on a Tuesday in November. Next, I'll show the reasons this tradition is outdated and actually leads to fewer voters showing up at the polls, and how modern voter suppression has made things even worse. Finally, I will describe a couple of policies that have been proven to increase voter turnout in some states and other countries as well. In 1845, President John Tyler signed a law that established a firm tradition of voting on the Tuesday following the first Monday in November. At the time, the U.S. was mostly agricultural, and lawmakers believed that voting on Tuesday would allow rural voters to attend religious services on Sunday, ride their horses to the polls on Monday, and then vote on Tuesday. So voting in November also made sure that the election wouldn't interfere with harvesting schedules. Election Day was also considered an unofficial holiday. Holly Jackson, a professor from UMass, wrote in the Washington Post that many voters could expect to be treated with barbecue, cake, rum punch when they showed up to vote. And George Washington even provided 158 gallons of alcohol to voters during one Virginia election. So while Election Day was not officially considered a national holiday back then, it might as well have been. And this was all well and good in the 1800s, but obviously times have changed. Don't forget that 100 years ago, it was basically just white Christian men that were allowed to vote, and almost 70% of the workforce were farmers. Today, less than 2% of our workforce is in agriculture, and anyone who is 18 and qualifies gets to vote. So let's take a look at how this 1845 law affects people in the modern age. According to Victoria Scheinman from the University of Pittsburgh, weekday voting is disproportionately difficult for single parents and people working multiple jobs because they're busy all week long trying to make ends meet. And non-voters say that scheduling and inconvenient polling locations are the main reason they don't vote. So some people claim that poor people choose not to vote between expensive voter ID laws, limited polling hours and locations, no same-day registration, and no easy way to transfer your registration if you move. It's no wonder that poor people vote at a lower rate than people that are well off. So the system is set up to make it harder for the poor to vote. I think the main idea of a democracy is that everybody gets a vote, and any law that can be passed to increase voter turnout is a good idea. I realize there are some added costs associated with these reform ideas, but this is our democracy we're talking about. No cost is too great to ensure maximum turnout and the security of our voting systems. However, it's clear that a certain political party has a vested interest in suppressing the vote of the poor. In February, House Democrats introduced a bill that would make Election Day a holiday and encourage private employers to give their workers the day off also. Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell refused to let the Senate even vote on the bill. He called it a, quote, power grab by the Democrats. And then Senator Kirsten Gillibrand tweeted that voting isn't a power grab, it's democracy, and it's literally the entire point of our representative government. And according to the Pew Research Center, Americans on both sides of the aisle support making Election Day a national holiday. 71% of Democrats and 59% of Republicans like the idea. Kristen Clark, president of the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights, wrote that making Election Day a national holiday would transform the culture around voting in our country and would inevitably improve turnout and participation rates across the board. Getting time off work, enduring long lines, obtaining access to childcare, finding the money to take public transportation to the polls are all real barriers that make it harder for poor people to exercise their voice on Election Day. By clearing away some of these hurdles, we would inevitably make it easier for people to participate. Another option is voting by mail. Right now, only 3 states, Oregon, Washington, and Colorado, have full-time mail-in voting. This seems like a good way to increase voting rates because it makes voting so easy. And Russia's ability to hack our voting machines makes a hand-countable paper ballot even more useful. So just having election day on the weekend would have a huge impact on voter turnout. The entire democratic world either votes on the weekend or has a national holiday during the week like South Korea and Israel. The only way to achieve these voting reforms is to elect a Congress that has the political will to enact them. Sadly, our current administration and Republican-controlled Senate will do nothing about this issue because they believe the additional voters this policy will empower are all poor brown Democrat voters. So I would encourage you to write your elected officials and go to town hall meetings if your representative has the cojones to hold one, and tell them what you think. Vote for politicians who come out in favor of expanded voter rights, and make yourself heard. My mom once told me that if I moved to Italy, I would never be an Italian, but anybody can come to the US and become an American. That's what makes us different. That's what makes our country special. We're all Americans, and we all deserve an equal opportunity to cast our votes. Thank you.